Welcome back. This is lesson one in our introduction to the book of Psalms. Today, we want to get to know Psalms a little bit better, and we'll start out by asking the question, what are Psalms? And then we'll look at how is the book of Psalms different than the rest of the Bible? How many Psalms are there? Who wrote them? And when were the Psalms written? So, first, what are the Psalms? Well, the word psalm means a sacred song or hymn. In the original Hebrew, the word meant praise. So, the Psalms in our Bible are lyrical songs of praise to God. Next, we want to look at how the book of Psalms is different than the rest of the Bible. Well, first of all, the book of Psalms is entirely Hebrew poetry. Now, there's poetry scattered through much of the Old Testament. Five Old Testament books are all or nearly all poetry, and they include Job and Psalms and Proverbs and Song of Songs and the book of Ecclesiastes. And there are several other Old Testament books that have significant portions that are written in poetry, and those would include Lamentations and Isaiah. Now, there are significant differences between Hebrew and English poetry, enough of a difference, in fact, that the entire lesson five is devoted to examining the structure of Hebrew poetry in more detail. So finally, Psalms, the book of Psalms, are poetry that are designed to be sung or recited in worship to God. Our next question, how many Psalms are there? Well, there are thousands of Psalms that were written, but only 150 are included in the Bible. Next, let's look at who wrote the Psalms that are included in the Bible. 99 of the Psalms identify their author in the superscription. That's after the title and before verse 1. David is credited with 73 Psalms. Asaph is credited with 12. The sons of Korah are credited with 9 Psalms. Solomon is credited with 2 Psalms. Heman the Esrahite is credited with 1 psalm, and Ethan the Esrahite is credited with 1 psalm. And finally, Moses is credited with 1 psalm. In addition to the 99 that have authors identified, there are 51 psalms who do not identify their author and are therefore labeled as anonymous. Now, 2 of the Psalms that are labeled as anonymous are identified as David's. That's Psalm 2 in Acts 4:25 and Psalm 95 in Hebrews 4:7. Finally, we want to look at when were the Psalms written. Well, the Psalms were written over a 900-year period of time. The earliest psalm is actually Psalm 90, written by Moses, probably sometime before 1406 BC. David's psalms, which reflect his time as a fugitive from King Saul and during David's own reign, were then written sometime between 1020 and 970 BC. Asaph was David's choir director, so he wrote his psalms during the time of David's reign. And Solomon, David's son, wrote his 2 psalms, and that would have been between 970 and 930 BC. The psalms of the sons of Korah and the 2 Esrahites were probably written after the Israelites returned from their exile in Babylon, which is 539 BC. Thus, the Psalms were written probably between 1400 BC and 500 BC, with over half of them, about 85, written during David's lifetime. Well, that's it for lesson number 1. I hope this gives you a better feeling for when the Psalms were written and who wrote them and what makes them different. Next, we'll look at lesson number 2, and we'll look at the structure of the book of Psalms.